record on this. Okay, thank
Hey.
you. Sorry about that. All right, well, thank you, Vicki. My name is Amy Hom. As Vicki mentioned, I am one of the board members of the AAUW Silicon Valley Branch, and I'm also co-chair of the AAUW California Public Policy Committee. I'd also like to give a shout out to the other co-chair of the State Public Policy Committee, Missy Maseko. Missy belongs to the AAUW Long Beach branch, and she has graciously agreed to provide technical management for our Zoom call here today. So thank you so much, Missy. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. During the presentation, please use the chat function to post any questions that you think of during the presentation. We're going to collect all of your questions, and when the presentation is done, we will turn off the recording before going into the Q&A session. A reason for that being that we want everybody to feel comfortable to discuss any sensitive questions or comments. So we're not going to have the recording going on during the Q&A. We ask that during the presentation, you put your microphones on mute, and we suggest that you put your Zoom into speaker mode for the best viewing experience. With that, let's get started. As many of you know, over the last year, AAUW California has been engaged in the school board project, in which we've been working to protect public education by defending school boards around the state from members who want to ban books, censor curricula, and institute policies that harm LGBTQ plus students. There's somebody in the waiting room. I've got to let them in. Okay. So the issue of book banning is very near and dear to our hearts. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jennifer Lynn Wolf to speak to us today about school book banning, a primer for readers of all ages. Dr. Wolf is a senior lecturer in the Stanford Graduate School of Education, where she teaches courses in teaching and learning, English teacher education, and young adult literature. Her research explores adolescent pleasure reading, what they read, how they read, and why they read, along with best ways to support and teach teen reading. Dr. Wolf directs undergraduate programs in the Graduate School of Education, a program designed to prepare college students to participate as informed citizens of the education democracy. Previous to working at Stanford, Dr. Wolf taught high school English in California public schools. And here is Dr. Jennifer Lynn Wolf.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you all for having me today. I've really been looking forward to having this conversation with you, and as I understand it, my job now is to share my screen so that I can share my slides with you as I talk, and I'm going to try and do this as seamlessly as possible. So I'll say a little prayer for me that goes well. Here we go. And I did it. Yay me. So a few pieces of bookkeeping on my end before I launch into the formal talk. And Amy, I'm gauging for 30 minutes. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. So one piece of housekeeping is that I am literally broadcasting today from my house, which means despite my best efforts to organize things, anything could happen in the background. I hope that it won't. Two, as Amy said, I am a former high school English teacher, and that kind of pervades everything I do. So if you get a waft of high school English as we go through today's presentation, you'll know that that's why. I've really been looking forward to this conversation today, and it has been a challenge, as I was sharing with folks before we went on the Zoom call, to keep this talk updated, because literally every morning when I wake up, there's some new news item about school book banning that feels important to include. So, speaking of high school English teaching, I like to start with an agenda. And here's our agenda for today, or what I hope to cover. First, I want to talk a little bit about book banning as a pandemic, which is how I see it functioning right now. I want to talk a little bit about why my focus is on school book banning in particular. Then I've brought with me a case study. It's the case of the banning of the graphic novel Mouse and the McMinn County School Board in Tennessee. And then the overarching question for my talk today is who should decide what young people read? We have a lot of choices. There are a lot of people who would like to have a part in this decision: judges, politicians, school boards, parents, librarians, teachers, and of course, all of us as well. I'd like to end with some open questions and some ways forward. A note about my slides: I will include, you'll see many images, facts, and statistics from other organizations and scholarly folks who are doing this good work of helping us understand the book banning movement that we're in now. And I have tried to be a responsible citer throughout, link, excuse me, and cite the various organizations whose work I'm using. One, to give them credit, and two, so that if you would like to pursue the various toolkits and, excuse me, tools that they're sharing, that you have access to it as well. All right. So here we go. I see this incredible surge of book banning that we're in right now, in the 2020s, as another pandemic. I think it has a lot of the qualities of a pandemic. It feels contagious to me. There's been a steep increase. The American Library Association collects probably our most complete data on book banning. So what you see here is evidence of the pandemic nature of book banning writ large, focused in the United States. And you'll see number of attempts to ban books. You'll see number of unique titles that have been targeted or challenged for censorship. You see overall increase. You'll see where these banning challenges are taking place. And when I think about the things that we learned from the last pandemic, what can we do to address a pandemic? Well, we can learn. We can educate ourselves. We can understand the material that's out there. We can look at case studies. We can talk to one another and educate ourselves about what's going on and why it's going on. It's one of the reasons that I do this work, and I hope that it will be a best way forward to address the book banning pandemic and perhaps also to prevent further censorship of the freedom to read. So by now you've got a sense of where I stand on this issue. Also from the American Library Association, the Office for Intellectual Freedom, you see an interactive map. If you were to follow the link, you could click on each of these states and see how many book challenges there have been in those states between January and August of 2023. So here, what you see is the lighter colored states are the ones that have had the fewest challenges, and the darkest color states, hello, Texas, are the ones that have seen the highest number of challenges in the most recent period of time. And I'm reminded when I look at this map of those maps that used to go up on the TV screen during the pandemic, during the COVID pandemic, where they would show us where are the strongest outbreaks, what can we do about that, really getting this feeling of viral spread, right? But today I want to focus on school book banning in particular. So I've resurfaced the where icon that you see on the left-hand side of your screen, where censorship occurred. One of the reasons I want to look at school book banning, and I want to ask you to look at school book banning with me, is because you can see that book banning is happening the most in schools right now. It is a kind of epicenter, if you will forgive me mixing my metaphors from earthquakes to pandemics, right? It is a central location of book banning, and it brings together quite an array of actors in the book banning movement. We'll talk about that more later in the talk. So I find it's a really productive and challenging way to look at book banning. And another reason that I look at school book banning is because I am a scholar of schools. I'm a member of schools. I'm an advocate for schools. And that's where my research takes place. And I'm currently engaged in preparing people to be teachers in the school system, having been one myself. So I think it's important as we prepare folks to enter into schools to understand what's happening there. In addition to the American Library Association, there's also an organization called PEN America. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with it. And they're very focused on book banning in general and school book banning in specific. And here with these red and gray bars, what you see is how instances of book banning have continued to increase from 21 up through 2023. In 21, there were more individual or unique titles banned. But in 22, 23, you see there's quite an increase in the instance of book banning in general. So the number of times an individual or a group went to a school and said, we want a book removed, challenged, banned, etc. So the steep increase that we're seeing in book banning overall is actually magnified in school book banning. And I know it feels a little bit, well, I don't know how it feels for you. For me, it feels a little bit funny to just be talking away, but I encourage you to leave questions in the chat. I've allowed quite a bit of time at the end for us to consider questions together. Here, I'm just going to read out loud for you. There are a lot of different ways of defining book banning. PEN America has given us a very useful definition of school book banning. And it reads as follows, but I need to move this out of the way. Here we go. PEN America defines school book banning as any action taken against a book based on its content and as a result of parent or community challenges, administrative decisions, or in response to direct or threatened action by lawmakers or other governmental officials that leads to a previously accessible book being either completely removed from availability to students or where access to a book is restricted or diminished. Books available in schools, whether in a school or classroom library or as part of a curriculum, were selected by librarians and educators as part of the educational offerings to students. Book bans occur when those choices are overridden by school boards, administrators, teachers, or even politicians on the basis of a particular book's content. Let's try that. All right, so now a little case study. This is a case study I've been following for some time. It's a case study of the banning of the graphic novel Mouse. If I could see everybody, I would ask for a raise of hands of how many people have read Mouse as a graphic novel or have had exposure to it. I can see a few hands up as I look across my screen. So here's the historical background that I believe is important in understanding what happened in 2022 in McMinn County, Tennessee. So in 1933, Nazi book burnings were carried out not just by the Nazi Party overall, but they were specifically designed to be led and carried out by the German Student Union. So the adults, for want of a better word, of the Nazi Party designed the idea of book burnings. And they also created a list of the books that they felt should be confiscated and burned. And then they turned that over to high school students and tasked them with going into their schools and into their libraries, looking for those books, removing them, and also conducting the book burnings, which were quite dramatic, violent, political theater. And you can perhaps imagine what a loaded invitation that would be to a group of teenagers in a time of turmoil. In 1953, Ray Bradbury authored Fahrenheit 451, a futuristic dystopic, but also historical recollection of book burning and book censorship that he oftentimes explained was based on what had happened in Nazi Germany and in World War II with book censorship and book burning. He said he wrote the novel in such a way as to prevent that from happening going ahead. Then in 1980 and again in 1986, Art Spiegelman authored and published Maus as actually it's a duology, two different graphic novels about the Holocaust based on the story of his family's survival and not. They are graphic novels, so they read like comic book novels, and all of the characters are cats and mice or rats. The Nazis are the cats, etc. In 1992, Maus was awarded the Pulitzer Prize. It had been a bestseller previous to winning the Pulitzer Prize, which then cemented its status. And then a decade later, no, way more than a decade later, I've lost my ability to do math, multiple decades later, in January of 2022, the McMinn County School Board in Tennessee voted 10-0 to remove Maus from the 8th grade curriculum, where it was being used in part to teach the history of World War II. McMinn County is a very rural, small county in Tennessee. And by all accounts, they did not expect anyone to be paying attention at the school board meeting where they voted this book ban. But the local paper, the Tennessee Holler, was actually attending that school board meeting. They broke the story and they asked for the school board meeting minutes, and they published those meeting minutes in full. After that, social media, major news outlets picked up the story and were quite outraged, and it received a ton of coverage. And all of this happened within a week of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which was pointed out. And so in a week and one day, the McMinn County Board held a second meeting to defend its decision, thereby further upping the visibility. And they refused to reinstate the book, even though they were getting a lot of heat. And while that was going on, Maus re-topped the Amazon bestseller list, sold out, went immediately into new printing, and many, many, many copies of Maus ended up showing up in McMinn County. They were mailed there to members of the school board, to the school librarians, I think it's the way it sounds to me, you couldn't walk a few feet without tripping over a copy of Maus at the time. And then about a month later, a pastor in Tennessee, right outside of McMinn County, led a book burning. And he collected as many of those copies of Maus as he could find, along with other books that he felt should not be distributed to young readers. And he hosted the live book burning, live streamed it on YouTube, and it received millions and millions of views. I think that the historical threads that run through this story and continue this story are really stark and alarming. And both Art Spiegelman and representatives of Ray Bradbury talked about their deep disappointment in the way that this transpired. One thing I'm especially interested in is how we know why someone or someone's wanted a book banned. Straight from the Tennessee Holler news coverage of this and the meeting minutes, we learn the following. The board cited 8 swear words and a nude illustration as reasons for dropping it from the 8th grade curriculum. So I have to remind you that they were mice, they were naked mice, right? So mouse nudity. The minutes show board members in agreement over the supposed inappropriateness of the text. One member, while agreeing that the Holocaust was horrible, brutal, and cruel, takes exception to its depiction in the book. It shows people hanging. It shows them killing kids. Why does the educational system promote this kind of stuff? It's not wise or healthy. Another board member is quoted as saying, we don't need this stuff to teach kids history. We can teach them history and we can teach them graphic history. We can tell them exactly what happened, but we don't need all the nakedness and all the other stuff. So to return to my earlier question, I'm not convinced after spending so much time with the case study of this book banning that nudity or the 2 or 8 swear words that were cited, one of them being shit and one of them being damn, by the school board are either the only reasons that they wanted this banned or the reasons at all that they wanted this banned. So that leaves us in an interesting place when we ask people to explain why they want something banned. How do we understand the reasons that they're providing? All right, so let's dive into it. Who should decide what young people read? Here are our choices for today: school boards, politicians, judges, parents, librarians, teachers, young readers themselves, you, me, maybe all of us. I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at each of these choices. Starting with the judges and the courts. Both our state Supreme and our federal Supreme Courts have oftentimes ruled on freedom of speech in schools. I began this slide with the words of Chief Justice Earl Warren in his decision on Brown versus Board of Education. In these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if they are denied the opportunity of education. Such an opportunity is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. So that was in 1954. A couple of cases here, if any of you are court fans, law fans. Engel and Schempp in 62 and 63 was a case about prayer in schools. When can we tell children how they have to speak in school, how they can be spoken to? Beginning of thinking about freedom of speech in school. And then it's followed a number of decisions about free speech and protest in school. Tinker versus Des Moines, looking at Vietnam War protests. Hines versus California, looking at a young man who wore a button to school that said F the draft, but it was spelled out. Hazelwood looked at school newspapers. When can they print what they want? When can they be censored? Morris versus Frederick was the case known as Bong Hits for Jesus, about a young man who carried around a sign making that statement. And in each of these cases, young people and their families came forward and said, can we please have freedom of speech protected in schools for ourselves, just like it's protected for people outside of schools, adults outside of schools. And in each case, the decision has sounded something like this. Freedom of speech can be curtailed in schools such that schools have the responsibility and the right to control speech so that everyone feels comfortable learning or feels safe learning. We require by law that students go to school, so if they're there, we should allow principals and teachers and school adults to make some decisions about what students can and cannot say in school, and teachers for that matter, so that all students have a maximum sense of safety and ability to learn. So freedom of speech does not directly inject itself into schools. It can be modified by school adults. And then more recently, Grimm versus Gloucester looked at Title IX in the civil rights of trans students and their right to declare their own name, choose their bathrooms, etc. So judges and courts have weighed in on this question in some ways of what students can and can't read in schools. Keep making that noise, sorry. Let's take a look at politics. Politicians, and legislators have weighed in on what students can and can't learn in school. let's take a look at Texas. So in June of 21, Texas passed HB 3979, which you may have heard referred to as the CRT bill or the Stop Woke bill. And this is a bill that bans the teaching of any materials. What it says is largely about race. Other exceptions are there too. That could mean an individual student should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other forms of psychological distress on account of the individual's race or sex. So I'll just let that settle in for a minute. I have shared with my students in the past that I do believe that teachers are responsible for cultivating safety in their classrooms. I'm not sure about comfort. In fact, I'm not sure how possible it is to learn without some discomfort. Learning involves growing, stretching, adopting new viewpoints, trying hard things. And when you're doing that active learning, I think there probably is going to be some discomfort involved. I'm on the fence about this distinction. After the Texas House passed the CRT bill, the no CRT bill, a state representative named Matt Krause created a list of 850 titles. And he sent those to the Texas Education Board, or I think they call themselves the Texas Education Agency, asking if any of the schools had books listed on the 16-page spreadsheet, sounding a lot like that Nazi method, actually. The two pie charts at the bottom that were calculated by Danica Ellis from Book Riot show that the largest percentage of topics on the books on the 16-page spreadsheet of the 850 titles were actually about sex, sex education, LGBTQ issues. And it's really only that little orange 9.3% that was about race and racism, even though this all started with the critical race theory bill. So again, back to this issue of how do we understand why people are really asking for books to be removed? And then you can see in the second pie chart that we're most worried about young people's reading. We're not worried so much about adults reading. We're worried about children and young people's reading. Flying on to Florida politics, very, very in the news right now. In 22, they passed, well, early in 22, they advanced HB 1300, which required schools to put a state certificated media professional at each school to review all student books and materials to make sure that they are what the state considers to be age appropriate. So this created a whole new list of workers, people who were certified to go into schools and inspect every book. Then later that same year, 22, they passed 1557, which is commonly referred to as Don't Say Gay bill. And that one prohibited public schools from having classroom discussion or giving classroom instruction about sexual orientation, gender identity, adopting procedures, student support forms that maintain the confidentiality of disclosure of students from parents, and requires public schools to bear all costs of lawsuits filed by parents, so that if schools decided that they didn't want to observe all the tenets of this law, parents could sue them, and then each school would have to pay for that. And then just a few days ago, this law came before Florida courts, and they ruled that now Florida teachers can say gay. They can talk about issues of LGBTQ topics, but they can't teach it. They may not include anything in their curriculum about sexual identity, LGBTQ issues, but they can talk about it. They can use the word, and they can reform clubs and support groups on campus that might say this word. On the one hand, it can be, I find it alarming and disparaging to read through these examples. But on the other hand, when we shine a light on these examples, we allow others to see what's happening. And I believe we paved the way for change. So look what California did. California passed legislation to ban book bans. Good job, California. This was passed in September of 23. Gavin Newsom led the charge, but I particularly like what Tony Thurmond, who's the superintendent of public instruction, had to say at the bottom. This legislation sends a strong signal to the people of California, but also to every American, that in the Golden State, we don't ban books, we cherish them. This law will serve as a model for the nation that California recognizes and understands the moment we are in. And while some want to roll back the clock on progress, we are doubling down on forward motion. Rather than limiting access to education and flat out banning books, like other states, we are embracing and expanding opportunities for knowledge and education, because that's the California way. I might just flag for you that Tony Thurmond has expressed his interest in running for governor. So you see how the focus on what's happening in places like Texas and Florida, while bringing attention to the politicians there and to those laws there, also gives us something to work or push against. School boards make a difference. They have a say. It's super complicated. I won't spend too much time on the policy and politics of school boards. And I understand from Amy that many of you are working with school board policy, so you probably know more than I do. But right now, we are seeing a steep increase in protest, abuse, violence, and disruption at school board meetings. In the United States education democracy, each state is responsible for governing its own education. That makes things complicated. We do not have one centralized education system in the United States. Public education is compulsory and it's funded by tax dollars. And in the United States, when you have an endeavor that's funded by tax dollars, you put in place a board of elected officials to oversee how those tax dollars are being spent. And that's how we got to school boards. They are in place to protect our tax dollars and to make sure that schools are following local, state, and federal laws. School board commissioners are elected officials. In most cases, they make very little to no money. Sometimes it can be seen as a stepping stone to a larger elected position, but very rarely. Each board gets to decide how it will regulate text. Some school boards don't want to have anything to do with approving or disapproving texts. They said, teachers, that's your job. Other school boards feel that it's absolutely their job and take it very seriously. School boards are required by law to hold regular meetings, to publish agendas, and to record and publish minutes. That's how the Tennessee Holler was able to get such close coverage of what the Tennessee School Board was doing, was by calling for those minutes. Up in the corner, you see governance in a time of chaos. This is the United States School Board Association's manual that they've just put out, how to manage your meetings in turbulent times. Parents and the book banning movement. I'm not talking about all parents here. I'm talking about a particular group of parents who have talked about something that they call pandemic lemonade, which is where they say, you know what, the pandemic was really rough. But one thing that came out of it was that I sat next to my child while they were going to school through their computer. And you know what? I saw what they're learning. And I didn't really like a lot of it. I didn't know that's what my child was being asked or told to learn. And I had a lot of time on my hands during the pandemic. And so I decided to make a difference about that. They joined together in various advocacy groups. Probably Moms for Liberty is the one that is most recognizable to all of us. Their goal is to disrupt the balance of power in public education. We have seen since the pandemic increased parental recruitment, increased recruitment of parents to be involved. increased involvement in school boards, school board meetings, and increased attendance. For a long time, those of us who are active in public education have asked for parents to be more involved. We just didn't know it was going to go quite in this direction. A little be careful what you wish for. We're currently in the process of reestablishing what parental rights are and should be within our education democracy. You'll see my little asterisks down there. I mean, for the record, I'm a parent. So like I mean, parents are my people. I'm not necessarily a Moms for Liberty. Moms for Liberty ask everyone to take the parent pledge. They pledge to honor the fundamental rights of parents, including but not limited to the right to direct the education, medical care, moral upbringing of their children. You can see that organizations such as Moms for Liberty feel that it is their right and responsibility to be the one who decides what children read. Right? Back to our question, who should be making those decisions? Just 2 more slides on who should we consider as candidates for making these decisions. How about teachers and librarians? And in the public school system, public school librarians are a form of teacher. They are certified, educated, and licensed just like teachers. They are prepared professionally to do the work of teaching and library science. They are members of professional organizations that advance and protect their professional fields. And by law, public school teachers, there's the Latin for today, are assigned to be the substitute parent for children when children are in school. And they're also by law mandated reporters, so that they see evidence or think they see evidence of any kind of abuse or mistreatment, teachers and librarians are required to report it as part of their professional obligation. 2 scholars who look at the helping professions talk about how members of the helping professions are responsible for making decisions of moral import under conditions of moral uncertainty. And that really explains the heavy responsibility we place on teachers and librarians when we ask them to be responsible for other people's children, right? Also challenging is the fact that certified teachers are accountable to a wide array of potential bosses. They're accountable to their students. They're also accountable to the students' parents and to the administrators who hired them and to the school board that they work for and for carrying out the curriculum that the district handed them. And they're accountable to state and federal departments of education. And they're also accountable to taxpayers who ultimately fund their work. Right? I thought you might like to see this. I won't read the whole thing. The American Library Association publishes a librarian code of ethics. So school librarians can have membership in the American Library Association. It forms their professional identity. They're also responsible for the school that they work for. You will see that the Librarian Code of Ethics includes the following. We uphold the principles of intellectual freedom and resist all efforts to censor library resources. We protect each library user's right to privacy and confidentiality with respect to information sought or revealed. And then this one is challenging. We distinguish between our personal convictions and professional duties and do not allow our personal beliefs to interfere with fair representation, the aims of our institutions, or the provisions of access to their information resources. And then to end us on a high note, we affirm the inherent dignity and rights of every person. We work to recognize and dismantle systemic and individual biases, to confront inequity and oppression, to enhance diversity and inclusion, and to advance racial and social justice in our libraries, communities, profession, and associations. You can imagine what a tangled web it is for individuals who are licensed school librarians who want to follow this code of ethics and fulfill their job as a school librarian. Right? So wrapping it up, sort of near the time limit that Amy gave me. Here are some open questions. And the reason they're open is because I don't know how to answer them. So I'm hopeful that after sharing all this with you today, I'm going to hear some conversation or start a conversation that will help me think further about the answers to these questions. The big one is, who should decide what young people read? Is this going to be a committee thing? Is this going to be one individual group? Are there any of those groups that we just went through that strike you as more or less qualified to do this work? Here's a challenging question. When, if ever, is school book banning appropriate? Are there any books that you actually believe should be kept out of schools, that should not be taught in curriculum, that should be off of school library shelves? And it's okay to say yes, by the way. How can we best understand the true reasons behind book challenges? Back to the example of mouse. What right should parents have in the education democracy? As I said before, I'm a parent. I'm also a teacher. But I expect to have, I don't know, full rights over my child, whether they're in school or not. So it's complicated. To whom are librarians most responsible? Should teachers be required to create a safe learning environment, a comfortable learning environment? None of the above. And then finally, I'm constantly looking for answers to this final question. Where are the points of agreement? If I want to make headway in expanding student and teacher access to books, I feel like I really need to talk to people who feel differently. And I need to come to some sort of meeting of the minds. I need to understand what they're thinking. I need to figure out how to address their concerns. And in order to do that, I need to find a starting place. A lot of times when folks who are very active book banners see me coming, like, oh, you look pretty liberal to me. It's something, I'm getting a real feeling that I don't want to talk to you. So where can I find this common ground to begin a conversation? And what I'm thinking about right now is both people who would not like books banned and people who are seeking to have books banned. Both of those groups really believe that books and literature have a very strong power. So maybe that's a starting place. I'm not sure. Always best to conclude with things we can do. What are some ways forward? I'm sure you've thought of many of these already. Oh, and by the way, over here in the Learn More category, the NEA has a banned book reading finder, and you can text banned to that number, and then they'll ask you some questions, and then they'll recommend different banned books for you based on what you like to read. How fun is that? Anyway, of course, we can read banned books. We can gift banned books. Please do celebrate Banned Books Week, run by the American Library Association for 2024. It's already scheduled. Here's your save the date, September 22 to 28th. What activities, presentations, or other things do you have planned to celebrate? Of course, use your public library, follow book banning in the news, learn who serves on your school board. I invite you to host a school board candidates night when election time comes around. Find the people who you would like to elect, and then host a school board candidates night. Locate book banning on your ballot, and by all means, talk to others about book banning. The more we talk about it, the more understanding we gain, the better our chances of allowing the freedom to read. And then, just as a little prize at the end, there's so many good documentaries and podcasts out there that are incredibly well done and that offer different points of view and different insights. So I've just tagged this on the end of the slide deck so that if you want to listen or watch, The ABCs of Book Banning just came out. It's an MTV documentary that interviews 4th and 5th graders about why they think books should not be banned. Anyway, I recommend all of these highly, and I hope that you find them to be helpful. And that, I think I'll go back to, no, we don't need that. I think I'll go back to this page. So I'm interested in these questions. And I've been talking for a long time. And now I am going to conclude talking and take a look in the chat, see what kind of questions you have. I'm happy to entertain any discussion. Amy, thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was so great and very thought-provoking. I am now going to stop the recording